The Wachau. This little region in the Danube Valley produces but a fraction of Austria's wine, but in a sense it's the nation's standard bearer abroad. There's a good chance that your first glass of Austrian wine was grown here, and there are several reasons why, in a country where 60% of production is white, this pocket of Lower Austria flies the flag for character and quality. One of those reasons is its beauty. The scenery of vineyards climbing up the rocky faces above the Danube is jaw-dropping, but there is much more to the Wachau than meets the eye. This is where we are, about 60 kilometres upriver from Vienna. Austria's vineyards are concentrated in the east, where the Alps drop down towards the vast Pannonian plain. It's divided into so-called generic wine-growing areas, which in turn are split into smaller specific regions. The Wachau is a specific wine-growing region within the umbrella area of Niederösterreich, or Lower Austria. This is the most important generic region by some margin. From the 2022 vintage, Niederösterreich accounted for 60% of the country's wine. The Wachau, this 20-kilometre stretch of the Danube, produced just under 5% of Lower Austria's wines and less than 3% of the country's total output, a dip in the ocean, but a towering peak by reputation. More than 93% of Wachau production was white in 2022, and it's monumentally skewed towards just two varieties. Grüne Veltliner makes up about 64% and Riesling about 18%. These are two grapes with tremendous quality potential, and they're hugely over-indexed here. True, Grüne is Austria's most planted grape, but the national proportion is a third as opposed to two-thirds here. You might be surprised to learn that Riesling makes up less than 5% of Austria's vineyard, so its almost 1/5 share in the Wachau is a significant mark of respect. If Austria is known for dry, pure, intense wines, then the Wachau is the obvious candidate for global ambassador. Climate and soils are two of its secret weapons, and a corollary of this is the endearing tendency of Grüne Veltliner and Riesling to show off site signatures in their aroma and structure. That's right, purity, power, and a sense of place. Wine nerd nirvana. Like much of Austria's grape-growing land, this is classified as a cool, dry continental climate. What does that mean? Well, the average growing season temperatures are relatively cool, and rainfall often comes in at less than 500 millimetres a year. Its position within the large landmass of Central Europe, albeit moderated by the Danube, or Donau as it's known in German, means a sizable jump between summer and winter temperatures. Those are the broad brushstrokes. Then you have the finer details that give this place its edge. These fall into one of two camps, the ripening factors that give the intensity, and the cooling factors that give definition and freshness. On the ripening side of the ledger, we have the warm air of the Pannonian plain getting sucked up the Danube Valley during the day. We have these warm, sandy soils, though more on soil later, and stone walls that store heat. We have sunlight reflected from the river. Plus, we're often talking about steep vineyards facing south on the river's northern bank, though of course aspect does vary and a good chunk of plantings are on the Danube's right bank. On the freshening side of the ledger, you have large diurnal shifts, that swing between day and nighttime temperatures, on account of continentality, and more so thanks to pre-alpine air travelling down the valley, cool air descending from the Waldviertel forest to the north, and the cooling influence of the Dunkelsteiner forest to the south. You also have altitude. The valley ranges from 200 to 500 metres above sea level. Still, summer temperatures sometimes get so high that the vines shut down, but the Danube's moderating influence means the slide into winter isn't too abrupt, and grapes can be picked very late into autumn here. We mentioned soils, and this is a major reason why top Wachau wines pique the interest of the terroir tragics who love digging into the detail of, say, Burgundy's Great Cru. Lower down you tend to find islands of loess, silty, wind-blown glacial deposits that evolve into light, sandy soils. Grüne Veltliner is happy among these deeper soils that retain moisture well, but both Grüne and Riesling start to get electric as you go further up the rocky slopes. There are countless variations, but the three principal rock types are Gefühle and amphibolite, both metamorphic rocks, and the sedimentary rock Paranise. Some other terms you'll hear bandied about are mica schist, quartzite, orthonite, and granodiorite. Of course, there are subtle shifts as you go from side to side or top to bottom of these slopes, but these three profiles give some idea of the composition. The sample on the left, from Achleiten, features gneiss with that distinctive dark green amphibolite lower down. Kellerberg in Dürnstein, where all this harvest footage was shot by the good folk at Domäne Wachau, and nearby Leubenberg, both illustrate that Gefühle gneiss well. Vines thrust their roots deep into the cracks and crevices in search of water, and their hard work pays off in the shape of low yields of seriously concentrated grapes. The average vineyard holding is just over 2 hectares, pretty small, and as with Burgundy, you'll have some rockstar growers with holdings in a range of Grand Cru sites. Some names to look out for on that front are Franz Hirzberger, FX Pichler, Prager and Emmerich Knoll. Meanwhile, Domäne Wachau is a highly rated cooperative bringing together hundreds of small farmers with first-rate vine parcels. I mentioned Domäne Wachau again as A, this video footage gives a peek into their home, B, the wines are easy to track down around the world, C, they tend to be fairly priced, and D, the standard is extremely high. Riesling's resilience partly explains why it's often planted in exceptional spots, but it's also because this grape has the quality potential to scale staggering heights. Anyone wanting a sensory gauge of what the hell minerality in wine is supposed to mean could do worse than track down a Riesling from here. You can expect something dry, meaning less than 9 grams per litre of residual sugar, pure, linear and long, with crystalline acid cut and the kind of mouth-filling structure and flavour impact that you might get from a Riesling from Alsace in France or the Pfalz in Germany. The textures here can go deep and seriously rocky. Grüne is a little harder to pin down, partly because you have a difference between the softer, fruitier styles of the lower, flatter Lürssen sand terrain and the results from the rocky terraces, which share a lot of the virtues of the Riesling I just described. There's also a distinctly Wachau thing going on with these varied iterations that we need to talk about. The Wachau has its own quality code, set up by the 200-strong wine grower body known as the Vinea Wachau. Founded in 1983, it restricts production to the legally defined growing area and is bound by, quote, commitment without compromise to quality, origin and purity. Among other things, wines that bear this badge, that's Leopold I von Kühnring on his horse, this was basically his backyard around the turn of the 13th century, have to be made from hand-picked grapes, contain only the natural sugars of the harvested grapes, i.e. no must enrichment is allowed, and show no discernible oak. Vinea Wachau also has its own set of style classifications. Here they are: Steinfeder, Federspiel and Smaragd. Steinfeder wines are the lightest. In fact, the majority are quaffed cold, young and close to where they grew. In other words, you won't come across many of these overseas. Steinfeder wines are named for the wispy European feathergrass that abounds in the Wachau's steep rocky terraces. Fresh, clean and crisp, they clock in at under 11.5% alcohol. Next you have Federspiel, wines that should walk a fine line between elegance and depth. These contain no more than 12.5% alcohol and should be fragrant, mid-weight wines, easy to drink but with finely etched detail. As befits this aristocratic landscape, the name is drawn from falconry. The Federspiel was the bait used to lure the falcon home. And at the top of the tree are the Smaragd wines. With alcohol levels above 12.5%, these grapes come off the vine latest and the wines should be profound, intricate, structured and long-lived. They're named for the Smaragdeidechse, the emerald green lizard that likes to sun itself on the stone walls in summer. Where Smaragd wines might at times have strayed into flabby behemoth territory, this shouldn't be the case and happens less and less. These are the most prestigious wines and their rich textures should be balanced by acid drive and mineral tension. And this kind of brings us back to my comment about characterising the Wachau's Grüne Veltliner. In the Oxford Companion to Wine, critic David Schildknecht comments on this grape's almost unheard of knack of achieving, quote, satisfying ripeness and completeness at potential alcohol levels ranging from 10.5% to 15%. That range is reflected in the wines, which might go from a crisp, aptly, subtly vegetal, drink young light white to an extraordinarily deep Vandergaard that evolves into echoes of fine white Burgundy. A friend recently quipped that Grüne was more than just spicily Riesling. Indeed it is, often rounder and earthier, with, as Schildknecht puts it, an otherwise unprecedented range of flavours including green beans, mange tout, cress, rhubarb, beetroot, roasted red peppers, tobacco, white and black pepper, citrus zest, iris and nutmeg. He continues, a tactile bite or pleasantly sizzling peppery astringency, referred to by Austrians as Pfeffel, is often treated as a varietal signature. Now chuck in some geological magic from these majestic slopes and you can end up with a kaleidoscope of liquid colour in a glass. You can find excellent Grüne Veltliner, sometimes with a similar mineral thrill, elsewhere. Indeed, the neighbouring Kremstal and nearby Kamptal both boast stellar sites. And the Wachau has come into line with other quality regions by becoming, since 2020, part of the DAC system. The Districtus Austriae Controllatus, they don't mind a bit of Latin here, is the national legal classification which runs alongside the members-only Vinea Wachau. It has 3 quality tiers, beginning with regional wines called Gebietsweine. Next you have the Ortsweine, where producers can bottle a wine sourced from a single village. Spitz, Weißenkirchen, Dürnstein and Leuben are examples of revered villages you might see on a label. There's a smaller crop of permitted grape varieties for this tier. And then, at the top of the pyramid, you have the Riedenweine, the produce of a single vineyard or ried. This will bear the name of one of the Wachau's famous 150-odd vineyards, and can only be made from Grüne Veltliner or Riesling. And of course, that wine should transport you to a highly specific and special place. You'll see this on the cap on the top of a bottle of quality Austrian wine, and when you see that name, Wachau, you know what to expect, and you should be in for a good time. And that, in a nutshell, is the Wachau, this magnificent gateway to the charms of Austrian white wine.